welcome everybody, and it's a wonderful opportunity to have a chance to just sort of have a chat with Sue. Sue and I have become good friends and email partners back and forth, in particular over the years with Len Press and
Bob Sennett.
And Bob Sennett. I think we stopped counting those. And Linda, and I think they use the same one, but I think we stopped counting the number of emails at some point. Thank God. I didn't want to see what the numbers were. So, Sue, I think before we get into your personal story, and it has something to do with how everything sort of actually fortuitously came together with you. This past weekend, there was a wonderful life experience, and I thought you might share a little bit about that and how you and your husband, Dan, enjoyed those couple of days together.
So you're talking about the Dragon launch that just
Absolutely.
happened. Yeah. So that was the first space launch from American soil in 9 years. I was present at the very last shuttle launch, and I've seen 5 shuttle launches, 3 of which my husband was on as a American astronaut, a NASA astronaut. He flew on SDS-72 in 1996, and SDS-96 in 1999, and SDS-105 in 2001. And seeing the launch was brought back a ton of memories of being down at Cape Canaveral and watching Dan launch into space. One at 4 in the morning, one in the early morning, and one in the night. And what was really interesting for me was how many of my family members sent me emails. They all were watching it too, cousins and nieces and nephews and stuff, because during the launch, you have a ton of people as your guests who come down to Florida to watch it. And I mean like hundreds of people who come down to watch it. So we had a lot of family come, and a lot of them wrote to me. They caught the space bug then, and they still have the space bug.
So I brought it up, one, because I knew your husband was an astronaut, and that you had that life experience of going down there. But you, at one of those, you had an incredibly fortuitous meeting with a very interesting gentleman. And although it's maybe not the official start of your story, maybe this is a place to sort of jump in. Yeah.
It's a very critical part of my story. So this was for Dan's first space launch in 1996, which was long before I had any vision therapy. Dan said to me, when we were going to invite all these people to the launch, did I want to invite Dr. Oliver Sacks? And he knew that I'd read all his books, and I really admired all of his writing and his thoughts. And I said, yes, I'd love that. So Dan had met Oliver Sacks at Johnson Space Center when Oliver came down to talk to the astronauts about what it felt like to be in space. What were the perceptual changes that happened? So now you fast forward, it's 1996. It's the evening before Dan's space launch. And the day before a space launch, the spouse always throws a big reception for all of her guests, or his guests, depending on. And so I basically had a reception for like our 300 guests. And so I was standing in what was sort of like the kind of line you're in when you first get married at your wedding, at a reception line like that, greeting all of these people. And I have to add, Dan wasn't there because he was in quarantine. They quarantined the astronauts for at least 1 week before spaceflight. And so, oh boy. Oh. So during the reception, you can hear my granddaughter in the background. During the reception, Oliver Sacks, of course, came over to say hello. And I had never met him before. And we got to talking, and he kept looking at my eyes. And yeah, exactly. And I said to him, I don't think I perceive the world the same way other people do, because I'm cross-eyed. And although I've had all these surgeries, I had 3 surgeries as a child, I still see the world as a cross-eyed person. So I still look with one eye and suppress the input from the other. And I alternate between the two eyes I alternate between the two eyes.
Right.
And he looked at me and he leaned really close in and he said in his British accent, because he's British, "Can you imagine what it would be like to see with two eyes?" And I thought, yes, I said, of course I can. I said, I'm a neurobiologist, I'm a professor, I teach about stereoscopy in my classes, I have my students do different, look through stereoscopes and various devices. So even though I don't see what they see, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm missing. And he said, well, okay. And then it was time to move on to the next person in line. So now it was almost 9 years later when I wrote him a letter about after I gained stereo vision.
So do you want to jump to the letter, or do you want to back up now? Like, how did you, what kinds of troubles did you have early on? And I always think, how did you find Dr. Teresa Ruggiero? How did you find her? How'd that all sort of take place? And we'll come to the letter later.
Right.
Okay.
So what happened was Oliver's question sort of sat in the back of my mind and bugged me, because if Dr. Sachs asked this question, then maybe I was wrong. Maybe I really didn't know what it was like to see with stereo vision. And I had quite a number of problems growing up, especially in school. I had a hard time learning to read. Such a hard time that when I was transitioning from second to third grade, they put me in a class that was like a remedial class, and every kid in the class had a problem. Some of them probably had what we would call like attention deficit disorder today. They could be very disruptive. My best friend in the class was a boy who had polio. And I doubt that he had any cognitive problems. But we were all lumped together if we were considered to be not quite right. Mm-hmm. And by that time, third grade, beginning of third grade, I had had the 3 surgeries. My eyes looked more or less normal.
Do you remember when the earliest one was, Sue?
Yeah, my first surgery was in June of 1956. I was 2 years old. My second surgery was summer of 1957. I was 3 years old. And the third surgery was June of 1961. I was 7 years old.
Got it.
And so I'm in school. My eyes look more or less okay. But I did horribly on the standardized tests, the achievement tests. The bubble test, the test where you have to fill in with by filling in, a little circle, a little bubble. And what happened was that after second grade, they moved me into this remedial class with all these other children who had a whole range of problems. I mean, that teacher, she really had to deal with a lot. And
she had her hands full, huh?
My mom went to talk to the principal about my placement. And he said, well, Susie's, performance on the test indicates she's of subnormal intelligence. And my mom said, but the teacher would tell you the opposite. The teacher says she's okay. And maybe it has something to do with her eyes. And the principal said to my mom, you must realize your daughter is a dim bulb.
Ugh.
And the teacher is a human being and she's biased. She might like the child. So she doesn't see the problem. But the standardized tests, those are scientific and accurate. And that's what he told my mother, who never believed him, of course.
Yeah, thank God.
So my mom was like this very quiet, soft-spoken, lovely person. And she actually arranged to get keys to the principal's office and broke into the school. one evening and took out a copy of the achievement test that I had done so poorly on. She brought it home. She brought me down to the basement. She told me not to breathe a word to my brother or sister, and she had me take the test. And she said I did all right. But see, my parents were so concerned by what the principal said that even though I was 7 years old, they'd been, raising me for 7 years. If he said I was of subnormal intelligence, it concerned them. They weren't so sure anymore whether maybe I was, And then I'll tell you one more story that happened as a result of that. When I was in graduate school, I went to graduate school at Princeton University. I had a National Science Foundation fellowship. My mom was very proud. And it was she who taught me how to read when the school gave up on me.
Sue, this was after the bulb transplant, right?
The what?
The bulb
the
transplant.
bulb
Okay, sorry.
Right.
Okay.
So no. So this is, my mom taught me how to read when the schools kind of gave up on me. And eventually I became a really good student, and I did fine. I went to college. Now I'm in graduate school at Princeton. And I come home for Thanksgiving or whatever, and we go to the supermarket. And who do we meet? We meet my second grade teacher.
Oh.
And my mom starts bragging to her, saying, oh, Susie, she's got a National Science Foundation fellowship, and she's a graduate student at Princeton, and stuff like this. And after the teacher left, and we went back to the car to drive home from the supermarket, I said to my mom, why did you say those things? It's embarrassing. Did you have to say all that? And my mom said, I wouldn't have said it to anyone else, but you ought to know that that teacher left the school on account of you. After what happened to you, she said, I cannot work with a principal who doesn't respect what a teacher thinks. And she left and moved to a different school in the area.
Wow.
I had no idea until that time that I had caused such disruption.
The world needs more people like that, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me, she was kind of a scary person. She would dump over people's desks if they weren't neat.
Yeah.
But she evidently was a really fine person.
So you had these 3 surgeries.
Right.
And were you continued, after age 7, continued being cared for by ophthalmology in general?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what happened is I had my surgeries done at Yale New Haven Hospital by Dr. Rocco Fasanella, who was a very well-known ophthalmologist. Even when I mention his name today to current ophthalmologists, they know who he is. And that was probably very lucky because the surgeries he did not leave me with a lot of scar tissue and did not restrict terribly the movement of my eyes. There were medial rectus muscle surgeries, lateral rectus muscle surgeries on both eyes. They did a tendonitis on my left lateral medial rectus. And I also, they did some work on my right, the vertical muscle.
Superior rectus?
That's superior rectus.
Yeah.
No, inferior rectus.
Inferior, okay, got it.
Anyway, so he continued to treat me until I was about 8 years old. I also wore bifocals because there was an accommodative component to my infantile esotropia. He removed the bifocals at that point, and for about the next 8 years, around 8 years, I didn't wear glasses at all. And I had 20/20 acuity with each eye. Meanwhile, my sister and brother became nearsighted, and I thought that I actually had the better vision. Mm-hmm. Because I wasn't wearing glasses for acuity reasons. And then when I turned about 16, I started to develop a mild myopia, and I went for a driver's test, and they said she needs glasses, and so that's when I started to wear glasses for myopia.
So
that was all with ophthalmologists.
Yeah. How did you end up in the care of Teresa Ruggiero?
Oh, so that happened so many years later. So I would go to an ophthalmologist, once every 2 years or so for an eye exam and an update on my glasses prescription. And I would always ask them, is there anything I can do about the crossed eyes? And they would say, no, critical period, nothing you can do. And in fact, when I didn't realize I didn't have stereopsis until I was in college. a junior in college. I was about 20 years old when I took a neurophysiology course, and I learned about Hubel and Wiesel's work on kittens that they had made strabismic, and how the kittens no longer had binocular neurons in their visual cortex, and therefore probably could not see with stereo vision. And that is when I learned that, wow, maybe I have a different visual cortex. Maybe I have a totally monocular cortex. And what is this thing called stereo vision? What is this thing called stereopsis? And I remember going to the ophthalmologist shortly after I learned that. And I asked him, do I have stereo vision? And he said, well, we haven't tested it. And I said, could we test it?
Yeah.
And he was pretty reluctant. But he got out the stereo fly, and I put on the polarized glasses, and I didn't see the fly, pop out from the little booklet, and I flunked all the tests. And he said to me, you don't have stereo vision because you don't need stereo vision. The logic has escaped me to this day.
Right.
They just didn't think it was that important. And they just didn't realize that the major problem with being strabismic, with having misaligned eyes, actually isn't the lack of stereo vision. It's the conflict between the two eyes. One eye is looking straight, maybe, and the other eye is turned in. The brain is getting conflicting input. Right. And you have to deal with the conflicting input with every glance. And that is what they didn't realize was so important.
Yeah.
So
when we teach this, I teach the course Amblyopia and Strabismus, and when we teach it, everybody's all concerned about diplopia. And it's like, no, it's confusion.
Exactly.
That's the biggest part.
That's right.
And few people talk about how the confusion, in my world, it was Nat Flax who actually talked about confusion being the underlying driving force. And everybody should stop being so darn concerned about diplopia. We have physiological diplopia that is there all the time for everybody, and we use that information. So stop being so concerned about diplopia. It's confusion. It's nice to hear how you put that into words and really drove that home.
Right. And I can remember very distinctly when I was in first grade looking at the words on the page. And I was looking at the word, it was or saw. I don't really remember which way, but the letters would move around. And I wasn't sure what the word was as a result of this instability in my gaze. So anyway, I had all these problems in school learning to read, which my mom eventually helped me with. I had a lot of trouble learning to ride a bicycle. I hated learning to drive a car. Still to this day, I'm a kind of reluctant driver, although I will drive a car today. And when I became a professor, and I'm teaching at Mount Holyoke, I was co-teaching a course of about 100 students with one of my colleagues. And she said to me at one point, how come you never look at the kids in the back of the room? And I said to her, what kids? I just didn't see them. Now, with my glasses, which were, prescribed for myopia, I had 20/20 acuity. But when I looked in the distance, everything was unstable because of this confusion, because of probably this underlying subtle nystagmus in my eyes.
This kind of thing going on.
Exactly. And I can remember watching my kids on the school stage and noticing that all the faces were it was hard to look. It was hard to keep my eyes steady on things. And so my solution, the biggest adaptation people have is avoidance. That's the biggest adaptation. So what's my solution to an unstable gaze, particularly in the distance? I didn't look in the distance.
Right.
And the only time I looked in the distance was to drive. And I avoided driving.
Yeah.
So,
I know you know the book Kurt Goldstein, The Organism.
Right.
And
Organism.
He talks about altering your milieu. So what you did is, in order to have successful things happen, ordered events. What you did was you stopped doing certain things.
Exactly.
It just sort of fits. It totally makes sense with things.
Right, right. And so I stopped looking in the distance, and that meant, looking at the back of a classroom of, let's say, that had maybe 10, 20 rows of chairs.
So before we get to Dr. Ruggiero, because I know
Yeah.
we're walking there, there's always this thing in there about, but she plays a mean game of tennis. So
Yeah, that's what Robert Krulwich said.
yeah, so talk to us about the tennis.
Okay, I don't play a mean I don't play a mean game of tennis.
Okay.
That was Robert Krulwich in the interview that I did
From NPR, right.
the morning edition interview with NPR.
Yeah,
Robert
yeah.
Krulwich is a wonderful man. I had a wonderful time working with him. And when he said that in the interview, on the radio show, I sort of laughed. Yes, I did play tennis with a group of friends. Our tennis game was more a social game than a high competition. I like to run. I've always been a good runner. And so I liked running after the ball. But no, I played
You enjoyed the game.
Game of tennis.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I had always
didn't
wanted
play
to
tennis
ask you
well.
about that particular remark.
Yeah. No, the
and
things that
even
I did very-
even Oliver picked up on it when he said, "Well, she's somewhat of a monocular virtuoso." If you
Right.
remember that
Well,
phrase. Yeah.
again, they were, that's Oliver once said in the acknowledgments to his book, he thanked people for allowing him to take them from being a person to a character, or
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
they embellished my tennis game, but no, what I was good at as a child was running and swimming, and swimming in particular. And if you think about it, swimming is a very low visual activity. You
Right.
don't need to have good vision to swim.
Yeah.
The ball sports were, I liked running around, so I wanted to play ball sports, but I wasn't any good at them.
So did the interaction with Oliver then trigger you to search out a different kind of vision care, or were you already seeing Dr. Ruggiero before that?
Oh, I was seeing her before I wrote to Oliver. So what happened was, if we go back to my, when I was talking to my colleague and she said, "How come you never call on the kids in the back of the room?" And I said, "What kids?" She took matters into her own hand. And after that, she would stand in the very back of the room. And when a student in the back of the room raised their hand, she would do this and point to the person who was with the question. And I realized, if things were that bad, I felt like Mr. Magoo, if you remember that cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
If things were that bad, I really should see if there's something I can do about my vision. And so I went to see Dr. Stephen Markow, who happened to have a optometry office right across the street from Mount Holyoke. And no, first I went to see an ophthalmologist in Holyoke, Massachusetts, who told me, "Oh, your acuity's pretty good in both eyes. It's correctable to 20/20. If you think you have a problem with your vision, you need to go see a psychologist or psychiatrist."
Psychiatrist, yeah.
Yeah, psychiatrist. So I left his office in tears, and I decided that was it for ophthalmologists for the moment. And I decided, well, there's this optometrist across the street from where I work. I'll just go see him and see what he says. And he said to me, "I think you would benefit from vision therapy." And I said, okay. And then a couple days later, he called me up on the phone at my house, and he said, "Look, I've been looking for someone who does vision therapy in the area, and I found Dr. Teresa Ruggiero in Northampton, which was a neighboring town, and I would suggest that you go see her." So I called her office, and I explained to the receptionist that I had been cross-eyed since birth, or within the first months of life. I had infantile esotropia. And I said, "I know you have vision therapy, but I'm almost 48 years old. And aren't I too old to benefit? And the receptionist, I'll never forget it, she said to me, we treat people from 0 to 90 years, so you're only halfway there.
That's a wonderful line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I made an appointment with Dr. Ruggiero. And first of all, when I went to see her, I thought I knew all about vision exams because I had had plenty of ophthalmology exams, um, all through my life. And plenty of, putting up the occluder and over one eye versus the other. But I had all these other tests. I had the Keystone test and a whole bunch of other different types of tests to look at the coordination between my two eyes. And after all those tests were over, and I finally met with Dr. Ruggiero in in the examining room, she came in and she was looking over all the tests, and then she looked at me and she said, "So tell me, what is it you'd like to do with your vision that you can't do today?" And that's from that functional point of view is from where we're going to start. And I told her I wanted to be able to drive with more confidence. I wanted to be able to read for longer periods of time. I said those were two of the main things that I wanted to be able to do. And I remember, she did some more tests, the cover test, of course, and other tests. And she said to me, you do not know where you are in space. And I remember thinking, what? That's crazy. I know where I am. I'm sitting in this chair in this examining room in Northampton, Massachusetts. I know exactly where I am. But of course she was right. And over the course of the next many months, I learned that yes, I really didn't have a good sense of where I was in space.
So you start working with her in vision therapy, and there's
Right.
many different tools and things you do. I think in some of the stories, either written or told about you, it's like they fixate on one thing. But it is something you had this incredible epiphany with. And just talk a little bit about, and I also know you've read almost everything the man has written. Talk a little bit about your experience with the Brock string.
Okay. Which was developed by Frederick Brock, who I think understood strabismus better than anyone else ever. So just by coincidence, I happen to have a Brock string here. So what happened was with the Brock string, which I think pretty much everyone who's watching probably knows, it's a bead on a string. Such a simple device, as elegant though as it is simple. And you put it up to your nose and you look at the bead. The bead is the target you're supposed to be fixating with both eyes. And if you do it properly, if your two eyes converge on the bead, then you get a double string image coming out of the bead, that physiological diplopia. And the amazing thing about that double string image is it gives you the line of sight of the two eyes. Yeah. And it shows you how the two eyes are pointing and converging and aimed right there on the bead. And so I started working with the Brock string, and initially I had to have the bead like practically up to my face before I could get the double string image. If it was any further away, I'd only see a single string image because I was suppressing one eye. Or if I did start to see a double string image, the strings were not converging at the bead.
Right.
And I thought, wow, I'm getting the feedback for where my eyes are pointing. And this to me was like amazing. It was such a simple way to know where my two eyes are pointing. I never knew where my two eyes were pointing. Some people with esotropia and exotropia know which eye they are fixating with and which eye they're turning. I never did. And so I started to do this exercise, and I was able to move the bead from practically at my nose, a little further, a little further, a little further, a little further away. And when I could do one bead about maybe 20 inches away, the vision therapist in Dr. Ruggiero's office said, let's do 2 beads. And so I started working with 2 beads on the string, one close, one much further away. And she said, can you get the close bead? And yeah, I worked at it. I said, yes, I got the X. She goes, okay. Now look for the further bead. And I looked at the further bead. It wasn't that far away, maybe 20 inches away or something. I said, I got it. I got the X. She goes, okay, close bead. Got it. Further bead. Got it. And then I remember this so well. And even though it was back in 2002, 18 years ago now, I said to her, I can feel my eyes moving. I can feel them converging on the close bead. I can feel them diverging, onto the further bead.
And the key point, Sue, was you could feel both of them. Yes,
right.
Both of them. Right.
I could feel both eyes moving, and I could feel this control over my eyes, which I had never had before. And I knew where the two eyes were pointing.
And you were getting the visual feedback of the change at the same time.
Absolutely, I was getting the visual feedback. And I remember the vision therapist said to me, okay, now it's time to move on to another activity. Because, of course, there are many, many other activities. And I remember I stamped my foot and I said, no, I'm just going to keep doing this. It felt so good. And that's one of the things that vision therapy provides, is the word is overused, but it empowers the person. It's not like I'm a passive victim of this particular way of seeing. I can control the way that I see. And it was an incredibly powerful experience.
Yeah. To all the optometrists on the call, or therapists and people involved in the profession, the point of what we are doing is empowering the patient. I think of much of what we do early in therapy is patient, I want to introduce you to your visual system. Here's what it feels like. Here's what you can do with it. Here's how to move it. Here's how to control it, and give you those kinds of feedback, and in essence, let you now learn how to drive the system.
That's right. That's right. And it was so much of medicine is about, you are a patient, you need to be treated.
Do it to the person, right?
It's done to the person, and vision therapy is all about the person taking control of their own vision. And that's a very, very powerful experience, especially if you've had problems with your vision all your life and you know that there's something a little bit wrong about you, Well, it was that vision therapy session afterwards, when I went out to my car to drive home after that vision therapy session, that was the first time I saw something in the stereo in real life. And what happened is I sat down in the driver's seat of the car, and I went to grab the steering wheel, and it was floating in front of the dashboard with this palpable volume of space between the dashboard and the steering wheel, and that was amazing. And I closed one eye, and the steering wheel sort of faded back into the dashboard. I mean, I always knew it was in front of the dashboard. There are plenty of other clues to that. The steering wheel blocks my view of the dashboard. I could look at it from the side. I mean, I knew.
Yeah.
But I had never seen this before. I had never seen space like that. It was astonishing.
And the interesting thing, Sue, is it's in exactly the distances you were working on at that time.
That's absolutely right. And the other thing I think that helped was the steering wheel was a circle. And I have, there's a slight, you would call it cyclotorsion.
Yeah.
Between the two eyes, the right eye's view tilts down to the right, the left eye view tilts up a little to the right.
Yeah.
And with a circle, it's easy to fuse because it doesn't matter.
Correct.
If,
so our vectogram, that's the coit, works beautifully well for you, floating things in and out.
Right.
Because if one of the coits is slightly rotated, it still locks in just fine.
It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And I have since made up sort of my own stereo pairs made out of rectangles, because, sort of like the eccentric circle, only with rectangles, in order to sort of, work with a cyclotorsion. But anyway, I saw the steering wheel pop out, and it was also sunset, and I decided it was the sunlight coming into the car at an odd angle that was giving me this sensation, because The day happened to be the day after my 48th birthday, and I knew all about the critical period, and I had lectured about it in class, and I'd used my own story. Oh, I was cross-eyed from birth or the first months of life, and look, I don't have stereo vision. Critical period really is true. And so when I saw the steering wheel pop out, I decided there's no way could this be stereo vision.
Right. You must have been hallucinating. The idea had been
must
put
have
in
been
there.
I was
It could not
tired.
possibly be
No.
real. Yeah.
Right. I was tired. The sun was, I could come up with all sorts of reasons.
Right.
The next day I got up and Teresa Ruggiero described me as completely compliant as a patient. I did every exercise they asked me to do. I kept a journal. I was very disciplined, and that's because that's the way I'd gotten through school, being very, very disciplined.
You can thank your mother for that, right?
I can thank my mother for that.
Yeah.
And so I got up the next morning, I did my vision therapy, I got in the car to drive to work, and when I went to adjust the rear view mirror, it was floating in front of the window. And the next couple months were just amazing. Things just kept floating, popping out. It was just unbelievable. Because what was unbelievable was I couldn't have imagined the world as seen this way until I saw it this way. Even though I knew all about stereo vision and that's, of course, brings me back to Oliver Sacks, because he had looked me in the eyes and said, "Can you imagine what it would be like to see with two eyes?" And now I realized, no. The answer was no, I couldn't. And of course, if you read Dr. Brock's work, he talks about that too, how when he would first have a patient see something in stereo, he said there's nothing you could do or say that would let them know what this experience was like.
Yeah. So you wrote this wonderful letter to Oliver.
2 years later, I had
Yes.
already, it was the very, very end of the year 2004. My vision began to change in 2002.
Yeah.
It's been, because I didn't believe it. I kept closing one eye, opening. Yeah, the world looks different. No one's going to believe me. I was afraid to write about it for two reasons. One, that no one would believe me, and they'd say, she's a hysterical woman, she's delusional. And two, that the change was so spectacular. But yet, if you read in the textbooks, nobody talked about stereo vision as being spectacular. And so I was afraid people would say to me, "Oh, that's nice. It's not really a big deal. I can close one eye and the world doesn't look all that different." Of course, if they close one eye, they have a whole lifetime of stereo views to sort of fill in the information.
Right.
So I had this precious thing now, and I was really afraid that if I told other people about it, they would just say, it's not a big deal. And then they would take this thing that to me was so precious away. And, maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe I was just way too emotional. So what happened was, one night in 2004, December 2004, I was clearing away the dinner dishes, and I just had this, I've got to write this down. I've got to write my story down. And so, as luck would have it, my husband and kids, all of whom are competitive game players, got involved in an all-night Monopoly game. And I retired to a quiet room with my laptop, and I wrote a 9 single-space letter about the change in my vision, about my whole story, growing up cross-eyed, changing my vision, the vision therapy. And I wrote it as if I was going to send it to Oliver Sacks. I started it, "Dear Dr. Sacks, we met on the eve of my husband's space launch, blah, blah, blah." But I really wasn't going to send it for the two reasons that I mentioned. I didn't want him to come back and say, "You're delusional," or "It's no big deal." But the next day I showed the letter to my husband, Dan, and he said, "You ought to send it." And I said, "Oh, I'm not so sure." And he just sort of rolled his eyes and he said, "It's a really good letter. Send it." And so I put in a closing, paragraph and signed it and put it in the mailbox and kind of forgot about it. Because I thought, okay, I've done it. I've written down my story. It's in my computer. I sort of felt like I'd come to an ending. I had captured my story in writing. It was down there. I wouldn't forget it now. And I thought, I'll just move on to other things. But Oliver wrote back 5 days later. At least I got the letter 5 days later. He wrote back right away.
He didn't write. He did his typing, right?
Right. Two-handed typing.
Yeah.
His IBM
I've corresponded with him, and I still have saved those letters.
Oh, absolutely.
And just so people know, it was an old manual typewriter, and he must have had trouble coming on and off of the shift key, because many of the letters in the words were raised and lowered and different positions. And I can just imagine him working so hard to write the reply to you.
Right. And then he would take a pen and he would correct his own writing. So what you got was sort of two letters. You got the letter he originally wrote and the way he corrected it, which sort of gave you more insight into the way he was thinking.
Yeah.
So he wrote me back right away. And when I got the letter, when I saw the envelope, I thought, oh, he must have an assistant who just handles
somebody who just
mail.
Sends that reply right away.
Right, and she, thank you for your letter. Dr. Sachs is very busy, something like that.
And he does have somebody who does that.
Oh, that, yeah.
But this was not from her.
No, this was from Oliver, and he wrote back, saying that he was fascinated by my story. We talked about the critical period, and he asked if he could come visit. And
tell us about the visit.
Thank you for introducing me to a new realm. He wrote that, and I was astonished. So instead of that letter sort of being the ending of my vision story, it was really the beginning. Because without Oliver's encouragement and support, I don't think I ever would have written Fixing My Gaze. And without the weight that, he carries behind him, he wrote to David Ubel about me. And then after he told me that, I wrote David Ubel a letter, an email letter, and I received back the most supportive email from David Ubel. And he sent me a copy of his latest book, and he blurbed my book, Fixing My Gaze. And I don't think any of that would have happened if I hadn't gotten Oliver's support.
No, or Dan suggesting him to come to the...
Or having had that experience with the space flight, because I began my letter saying, we met on this night. You asked me this question, could I imagine what it'd be like to see with two eyes? And I told you I could, and I was wrong. And so that's how I began the letter. And
so he comes to your house, and he brings an ophthalmologist, because of course you've got to have
Wasserman, and Ralph Siegel, a vision scientist.
Right, and they brought some stereo tests.
Oh, yeah.
They were going to put you to the test.
Right.
And what happened?
So first of all, I have to tell you how I prepared.
Okay.
I reread everything Oliver wrote, because that's same sort of thing, like, I gotta
get in
prepare to the hilt.
Yeah.
And so I reread everything he wrote. I knew he liked bananas. I knew he liked certain types of food. So I made sure that I had for lunch everything that he liked. He liked smoked salmon. So I went out and I got the best lox I could find. It's not New York City lox, but the best I could do in Massachusetts. And I got the bananas, and I got teas that I thought a British person would like, the whole thing. Yeah. And he came to the house, and first we just had, lunch together. They were going to take me out to lunch. They didn't tell me that, but that was their plan, to take me out to lunch. They didn't know that in South Hadley there aren't a lot of wonderful places to eat.
No place to get bananas and salmon, but anyway, yeah.
So but I led them into the dining room and I said, well, I have lunch all prepared. And I remember him, oh my goodness. So anyway, we ate lunch and it was very social. And then they brought out all their stereo stuff. Ralph wanted me to look at random dot stereograms, which at the time I couldn't see. I can see some of those now. Those are very hard to see if you have any kind of vertical or cyclotorsional, misalignment. And then Oliver had this book, which I happen to have with me now. It's called Beneath the Sea, where it has, two pictures that can be seen, one from the right eye and one from the left eye when you flip up the glasses to look at it,
Yep.
And he put this picture in front of me of a fish. So a stereo pair of a fish. And I put up the glasses, and I got to tell you, I was very nervous, obviously, through the whole afternoon. So I was very revved up, very adrenalized. And I looked at the picture with the glasses, and the fish's mouth was like coming out at me, and it was so exciting. I jumped up from the chair and said, look at that fish, look at the way its mouth is protruding out. It's like it could swallow me up. And then I stopped. I was at that point 51 years old, and I sat down and I thought, no 51-year-old woman should get that excited about a 3D fish.
Yeah.
And I was sort of like, calm yourself down. That's what I'm thinking, calm yourself down. He's going to think you're an idiot. And I looked over at Oliver, and I'll just never forget it. He had this huge smile on his face, this huge, gentle smile. And he said to me, I like these things too.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment that he went from being somebody I admired because I liked what he wrote. When I first met him, I was afraid that the person I met on the pages wouldn't be the person I met in person.
Yeah.
But it was at that moment I just sort of felt like, oh, okay, we're on the same wavelength. I can talk to this man.
Yeah. And by the way, it probably was helpful that they were the ovals of the mouth, almost like your circle.
Right.
And that it facilitated the fusion and the depth.
Right.
And what others on this call might not know is that Oliver was a stereo enthusiast.
Oh, absolutely.
He had many, many stereo cards. He belonged to a club or clubs
Right.
where they would get together, share cards, look at them with their stereoscope. And correct me if I'm wrong, they had their own rating system for how much depth they saw in some of these things.
Right.
And Oliver almost had a hyper kind of sense of depth, where someone else would say, well, I see it popping out a 4. He might see it popping out an 8, or that type of thing.
And that happened, we looked at the stereo fly, and I saw it like this high above, the page, and I was all excited about it, and the other saw it higher than that, because my stereo has gotten deeper over the years. It's, it started out more shallow. And after all that, we got into the car, Oliver drove, and we went to Northampton, and we had spent several hours with Dr. Ruggiero. And she showed him all the stereo tools and other vision therapy tools that they use. And he was very excited about it all, and he tried all the different types of tools. In fact, I think it made him kind of tired by the end of the day.
Yeah.
So,
so I think it's interesting when we were thinking about doing this. You were like, "How are we going to fill?" And we're barely 1/3 the way into our little outline here. So, and I hope people are enjoying. Before I go a little further on what we had said, there's an interesting dynamic interplay that I sort of a line that you have walked. A lot of people, Stereo Sue must be this incredibly special story. And they get into all the detail about this and this and this and this. And I've been impressed where you made a decision that also said, wait a minute, if I can be helped, there must be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, many, many, many people like me. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
That's right.
That a person who could amplify my story and get it out there did. You're special, of course. We love you. But you're not actually, in terms of the fact that what optometry and what therapy can do for people like yourself, about 5% of the population, depending on what numbers and studies you look at and that kind of thing, it's never too late to work at this. And you have done some amazing things. Like, as you said, you wrote the letter and sent it, boom, I think my story's done. Oh, Oliver comes and visits, and isn't this wonderful? Now he believes. But you had such a journey that kept going from there, and not just about writing the book. Some of us, was it Andy Warhol in the 15 Minutes of Fame? Right? And it's like, you didn't take that path. And everybody on this call, all the patients, all the people who've read your book and written to you from all over the world who've asked for help. And in fact, we have somebody here that, I did this and something happened at 20 years of age and blah, blah, blah. And what can happen? It's like, go see a behavioral optometrist. I don't know, Colin passed this, type thing on. And I think before we get into people's individual stories, because there's always, I have this and this and this and this, is like, yes, our wonderful profession can help. And don't be your own optometrist. Put yourself under the care of somebody else and engage in that way. But there were certain things you did. Like, for example, you invited Lenny Press and myself to come down to Vision Science Society meeting. And by the way, you were right. It was not a poster. It was a demonstration night. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience? Because, man, did that open up so many other things that flowed from there.
Yeah, so what really struck me when I started with the vision therapy was discovering the field of developmental behavioral optometry. I never had heard of it before, even though I'd been cross-eyed from, birth on or whatever. All I knew was ophthalmology. And also, as a scientist, sort of brought up in a very reductionist way of thinking, which was the way that I enjoyed thinking at the time, which is, sort of, you have a problem, you break it down into all of its components, and then you try to figure out how to put all those components back together again. I had never heard of developmental optometry, which takes into account the whole person, that the way a person sees isn't just about, light photons hitting the retina talking to the thalamus talking to the visual cortex, blah, blah, blah. People's experiences, their expectations, the way they move their eyes, their emotional state, their cognitive state, it all impacts how you see. And this hit me over the head, that my vision wasn't just a purely mechanical process. And so I thought, well, at Vision Sciences Society, people talk about perception. They're aware of these ideas, but they're not aware of developmental optometry, which actually puts a lot of these ideas into practice, and also has a lot of ideas themselves that perceptual scientists should learn about. And so that's why I thought it would be fun for us to go down to Vision Sciences Society, and the demo night is where, you can put out things like the Brock string and the vectograms and lots of other things and have people try them. And it turned out to be very successful.
Yeah, we brought some yoked prisms as well, and
we had yoked prisms,
a beanbag, toss it out, into a little thing, and
right.
Lenny Press was there, and it was fascinating because people would. You were usually the first person they spoke to, and and tell me about the story, blah, blah, blah. And then you would pass them to either Len or myself. You need to speak to these people.
Right, right.
And
I wanted the vision scientist to know much more about optometry and the optometrist to make a connection with the scientist. It's like it's like the blind man and the elephant story, where, each blind man touches
touching
a
a
different
different
part of the
part.
elephant and sees a different part of the elephant, which in this case is vision. And I still feel like there should be much more connection between the two.
Yeah. So two people that come to mind that you helped link us together with, one was Betsy Quinlan, and the other was Nigel Daw.
Right.
And Betsy was at University of Maryland and doing a tremendous amount of work on cortical plasticity in the visual system, and helping understand how things could change. And she was doing work on these, I guess, English short-haired rats or whatever, and putting them in absolute, making them a complete amblyopia, surgery at birth, letting them grow, get through their critical period, and then putting them in 10 days of absolute pitch black darkness, doing VEP types of recordings and seeing that this pitch black darkness could actually put them back into an infantile state in their retina. And then through intense perceptual learning, showing that they were not amblyopes anymore. Just absolutely amazing work that she spoke at NORA and spoke at one of the ICPOs and got the award for the best speaker. And if that, all of these little chance things don't happen, the work of Betsy Quinlan doesn't come to the attention of optometry. Optometry doesn't come to her attention. Some of the work, I see Ben Bacchus on the call here, some of the work that I think they eventually did at SUNY and followed up on things also doesn't happen. So there's just so much wonderful that came out of that. And then the chance meeting with Nigel Daw, I think he was at Yale University, a professor of ophthalmology, basically wrote a wonderful book on vision development, but it's not the way optometry looks at development. It's how the actual visual system develops, the nerves connect and how the systems work. And it was a textbook for ophthalmology. And years later, he came to us basically saying, that vision therapy thing, I want to put a chapter in the book in there on this. And I had the good fortune, again, only because of all of these steps, to work with him. And the new edition of the book, he said, oh, the term critical period, we're going to get rid of it or only talk about it in historical perspective. This is how we used to think. And we're including a whole chapter on vision therapy. And again, all things that flowed from the wonderful happenstance or events that sort of come together. So much of what happened further on, thanks to your again, being in the right place at the right time and having a sensitivity of how do I help educate these people? Oh. Now, you had the good fortune too, Sue, to come in contact with some amazing people in this profession. Yeah. You want to talk about some of your trips and journeys and who you've had the chance to interact with?
Oh, I met, while I was writing Fixing My Gaze, I wanted to talk with other optometrists in addition to Dr. Ruggiero. So hold on a second.
Oh, I've got your list if you'd like.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I mean, you obviously, we started together, but Bob and Linda Sannett you spent time with, and
right.
The late Harry Wax.
Oh, yeah.
Carl Gruning,
right.
Dave Cook. Now, unfortunately, we just lost him as well, the late Selwyn Super.
Yeah.
Kelly Knipple, Brenda Montecalvo, Mark Taub, Emil Franke.
Oh, yeah, that was quite a visit.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Bob Letterman, Nancy Torgeson, Glenn Steele. I mean, the list that you
Yeah, I
sent me
don't
just
mention,
goes
I
on and
don't know
on.
if I remember because just wrote that letter off the top of my head. Israel Greenwald.
Yes.
He was a partner of Brock, and I went into Manhattan to SUNY, and he showed me around, and we did explained to me a lot of the different techniques that he used, and I'll never forget because when we went out onto the street, he said to me, "You're not from here." And he grabbed my elbow to make sure, like, I wouldn't run off into the middle of the street and get hit by a car. But yeah, I met a ton, Hans Lessman. I went down to Pittsburgh and watched him work with some of the patients there. In fact, he even let me stay in his home. So I met his whole family, had dinner with them, and slept overnight there. It was during a snowstorm, too, in Pittsburgh, but that's neither here nor there. So I was welcomed by all these optometrists and Len Press, of course. And I went and visited a lot of these optometry offices. And it introduced me to the whole field of developmental optometry and this whole idea of treating the whole person, a holistic way of looking at a person and coming to the realization that to treat somebody's vision, you really have to know the person as a whole individual, not just, their prescription for their eyeglasses or whatever, particular medical detail about
Right.
them. Yeah, and I went to obviously COVD conferences and OEP meetings, and for a reductionist scientist like myself, it was really, no pun intended, but it was really eye-opening.
Some people have asked just a couple of questions. One was,
Sure.
What is the book again? And the original book was Fixing My Gaze. There it is. A Scientist's Journey into Seeing in Three Dimensions.
That's right.
And you have a new book that people should be on the lookout for as well.
Oh, well, I'm writing a new book. The title is Coming to Our Senses. It will be published by Basic Books in April of 2021. And that book is about two individuals, one named Liam, a man who was born practically blind, who gained near normal acuity at the age of 15. And the other is about Zora, a former student of mine, who was born profoundly deaf and got a cochlear implant at the age of 12. And it's not easy to gain a new sense. In fact, many adults who gain a new sense end up rejecting it. And the story is about how they accommodated to their new sense and how they learned to embrace it.
So not only those books, but the fish book. What's the name of that? Somebody wanted to see. Is it still available?
Beneath the Sea in 3D.
Beneath the Sea in
Mark
3D.
Blum.
Mark Blum.
In fact,
There you go, Ruth.
Oliver brought this book with him when he came to see me, and then when he left and he gathered up all his equipment, he left the book, and I said, "You left the book?" He said, "Oh, you enjoy it so much, I want you to have it."
That's wonderful. There was also a question, do you continue to do, and I think I know the answer, but do you continue to do some VT activities?
I do, and for two reasons. One is Dr. Ruggiero and I did an experiment quite a while ago now where I stopped doing any vision therapy for 6 months. And during that time, there was a decrease in my stereo acuity. And she noticed on cover tests, I wasn't rock solid anymore. There was, a little bit of eye wandering during the cover test. So for somebody like me who was basically esotropic from birth or the first months of life and didn't learn to use their eyes together until the age of 48, I think you do need to do some refresher VT. And by that I mean, use a Brock string or a vectogram or stereo pair refusion. Do some work on a regular basis, in the same way that you might stretch before going out to run or, do, that sort of thing. The second reason I continue to do vision therapy is because I use myself as my own experimental subject, and I just really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so I'm, trying to find I have a little bit of a cycle torsion. Can I get rid of it? You know, this sort of thing. So I continue to work on things, and I actually continue to see better and better. I'm 66 years old now, and I would say my vision now at 66 is better than it was at 56, and certainly better than it was at 46. How many people can say that? And so I enjoy doing the vision therapy. It was a liberating experience for me, and it still is. And so I would say probably 4 or 5 days out of the week, I continue to do some vision therapy.
That's wonderful. So there's a question that also came in, and I won't try to answer it for you, or I might give the optometrist point of view on it. But the question is, do you think the surgery set a foundation for you to be able to achieve stereopsis in the VT, or do you think they were part of being like an obstacle to the success?
That is the $10 million question. And, you know, I can't roll back the time and figure it out. My thought is that, yes, I had a pretty big eye misalignment. And the surgery, when I first saw Dr. Ruggiero, she measured me at 8 prism diopters at a distance of esotropia and 25 prism diopters at near. And that was a lot better than it would have been without the surgeries. So I do think that the surgeries brought me into the ballpark of fusion, and then it was a matter of doing the therapy. And also, I have a vertical prism in my glasses to reduce the vertical. I had a 5.5 diopter vertical at distance, 3 diopter vertical at near, and reducing the vertical. I have a 2 prism diopter vertical prism in the right eyeglass lens, and reducing the vertical misalignment, I think, was absolutely critical. Because if you read in the literature, it is very hard to have spontaneous good vergence movements if there's even a small vertical misalignment between the two eyes. So getting rid of or reducing the vertical misalignment.
Right, exactly. Yeah, reducing the amount of effort that has to be done in that.
Right.
I can just say, if there happen to be any people that are relatively new to VT on this event, from my perspective, having a person who's never had the surgery, who has a bigger turn, is typically easier for us to take care of than somebody who's had, like you have, the 3 surgeries. What we don't know, we don't have any actual measurements on you early on before the first surgery. But when we start to see things like the vertical, like the cyclo come in, those are things that make me think, was that from the surgeon's knife?
Right.
Because the mechanism that we understand that people turn their eye in early on, there's not a reason to put those other things there. So most likely the geometry,
Right.
Those little odd asymmetries are probably from the surgeon, but we have no way to know for sure.
Right. And I do know this, that I have my surgical records because Yale New Haven Hospital keeps all their records. So they dug them out for me. And for the first 2 surgeries, it said I had esotropia. For the 3rd surgery, it said I had esotropia and a left hypertropia.
And that's why they did the inferior rectus at the same time.
Right, on the right eye. And after that, I ended up with a right hypertropia.
Right. And when they start messing with one of the either the superior or inferior rectus or any of the obliques, that's where you absolutely, there's higher risk of getting the cyclo. So most likely the cyclo came as a result of the inferior rectus shift.
So I kind of feel like the surgery might have put my eyes into the ballpark for fusion, but it also created a impediment to having as good a fusion as I possibly could have because of the cyclo that resulted. But, you know, I don't know. And I'm not, my parents did, I think, the best that they could do.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think I was very lucky that the surgeon I had was Rocco Fasanella. And the reason he was my surgeon was because when he was just starting out as a doctor, he rented a room in my aunt's father's house.
Wow.
So there was the connection. Otherwise, I don't think I would have had such a good surgeon.
There's a question, Sue, about your experience of any actual double vision.
Do I have double vision?
Did you, do you, et cetera? So.
Yeah, every once in a while, two things will bring out some double vision. One is looking at a church steeple. If it's the only thing that I am looking at in the sky, it's sort of sticking out there alone, and I happen to turn my head from the lower left-hand quadrant up to the right, I will have a moment of double vision, and then it singles out. So, as my eyes are moving to take in the steeple, perhaps not perfectly coordinated. If I go in the other direction, no double vision. So there's that one. And then every once in a while reading, if I'm really tired, and if I'm reading by lying on my back with my head on a pillow, which is not, Emil Franke told me never to read that way.
Yes.
If I'm
reading, he also would have told you don't wear metal frames, but we won't go there.
Oh, really?
Oh,
I
yes.
didn't know that. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Then every once in a while, it's not double vision so much. I will get confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out I played with this with Teresa Ruggiero, and I had her watch me until this happened. And it turned out that my right eye actually went exo at the time. And then what would happen is, and it would happen if there was text on one side of on one page and a picture on the other, like could happen if you're reading a magazine.
Right.
And then the two images would overlap. There would be that confusion. And when that happens, I know that I'm really tired, and it's probably best not to be.
Take a break. Yeah.
Take a break. Yeah.
Take a break.
So I used to get double vision when I was brushing my teeth with my electric toothbrush, but that's gone away.
Oh, the vibration.
Yeah, the vibration, but that actually was kind of a good test. And now, because I worked on it, I don't have that anymore.
So besides traveling the U.S. And internationally and talking with lots and lots of optometrists, I know that you also went into labs of some pretty amazing people doing some incredible research in the field, and some ophthalmologists who were also doing some great work. Would you like to just chat a little bit about some of that experience?
Yeah, I went up to Cornell to give a talk up there. I went to Dr. Larry Tyson's lab at Washington University in St. Louis. He does a lot of work on strabismus, also on monkeys that are either made strabismic by through prism or cutting eye muscles, but also monkeys, like people, some of them are naturally strabismic, and he has worked on those as well. And that was a very interesting experience, because I gave a grand rounds to the ophthalmology, Department of Ophthalmology department, and I spent part of the day with their ophthalmology residents. And one of the ophthalmologists came up to me afterwards, and he said, I do a lot of cataract surgery, and I've had patients who have been amblyopic, and they then develop a cataract over their good eye. And when they do, their amblyopic eye rises to the occasion.
Absolutely.
And starts to see much better. And he says, but then after I remove the cataract from the good eye, their amblyopic eye goes back to being amblyopic. And so I hope he's thinking now, well, maybe that could be avoided if those patients went through some kind of vision therapy. Larry Tyson was also very skeptical that I had infantile esotropia.
Right.
Because of the whole critical period idea. And so he wanted to examine my eyes and vision, and I told him that would be all right to do. And I remember he started looking at my vision, and he noticed the not so latent nystagmus.
Yes.
And he got all excited, and he moved me into another room and started looking at my eyes more, with a slit lamp very carefully. And I got worried. I said, Larry, do you think is there something wrong? I thought maybe he saw a tumor in my retina or something. And he said, no, but I think you have latent nystagmus. And then after that, he put search coils in my eyes and monitored my eye movements when covering one or the other
so that
eye.
people know what those are. They're scleral contact lenses with the coils mounted in them, and then you have to be in an area with a magnetic
Right.
field measurement thing so that you
Right.
can actually measure the movements of the eyes in 3 dimensions inside this system.
Right.
So, yeah.
And he had me do that. And, the system he had was set up for monkeys. And macaque monkeys, which are much smaller than people. So I was like really crammed in. It was just lucky it was me and not like somebody so tall like my husband. And, as I'm looking at the single target with one eye, I start to see it jittering. So I
Yeah.
wasn't at all surprised that he was beginning to see the latent nystagmus. And that was one of the things that convinced him that my story was, legitimate. I really did have infantile esotropia.
Yeah, yeah. He was, by the way, again, one of the things that filtered down after I worked with Nigel Daw on the book. Nigel was one of the head people that put together this research meeting on amblyopia from the International Retina Research Foundation and pulled that all together. We had like 14 optometrists, 18 ophthalmologists, and about 50 some odd researchers coming together to work and come up with a new definition of amblyopia. And Larry was there and in one of my sections, and it was very interesting to have him hear how he presented on some of his research and this type of thing. So fascinating. Again, if all those things don't happen, there's a number of people that don't end up at that thing. And maybe the idea that no more patches, which is the message that Nigel wanted me to bring for amblyopia, no more patches, no more patches, that we could get through things like that. Got a few more questions for you. So we have somebody here who's been through some therapy, had 2 surgeries, and part of the problem here is without getting into all the detail, we don't know exactly some of the degrees, but there's a size perception difference, a small amount of anisoconia,
Right.
and there's a small amount of cyclo. And I think the question is, what suggestions do you have? Obviously mine would be, I got to examine you and find out to what tolerances some of these things are. We as optometrists always think clear single binocular vision is the thing. But if there's non-concomitancy, the size difference is much bigger. I've got cyclo over 8 degrees. Every once in a while, if either channel can be a leader, I've done monovision in either glasses or contacts. Let one eye be the one for distance, the other for near. Let them use both. They're still using both for all their peripheral things, and early warning and guidance and this type of thing. And they can still have binocularity, but just let each be a leader in there. But so again, we don't know the degree of cyclo. We don't know the degree of anisoconia. But any words of wisdom for somebody like that?
I think your words of wisdom were the words of wisdom. But that does bring up a point, and that is that I've received emails from more than 1,000 people with binocular vision problems. And they often ask me for medical advice, which I am not going to give them because I am not a clinician. And that's when I then send an email to you Len and Bob and Linda Sannett, and it's usually very short. It'll say something like, referral needed for man in such and such a place who has such and such a condition.
Right.
And within 24 hours, I'm usually writing back to them with the name of a good optometrist, who's, relatively close to where they live.
Yeah.
And I think we've done this now more than 500 times, I think. And
it could be double that.
been wonderful.
We'll see. Yeah,
But
we'll see.
it's-
It
you
could be
guys-
double that.
What?
It could be twice as many times,
Right,
Sue. but
right.
That's
And
okay.
from all over the world, too.
Absolutely.
And I write to them and I say, I've asked, optometrists that I know well, and this is what they suggest. Because I'm not going to be giving people medical advice. That's not where my expertise lies. What I want to do is connect people with the field of developmental and behavioral optometry, and let you guys do the expert advising.
So one of the exciting things being around you is that, and when you said, "Oh, should a 50-something-year-old woman show that much excitement about something?"
Yeah.
You have a level of enthusiasm that we all love to see explode. And we want to see that with our patients as well. So do you have any thoughts about how to inject that enthusiasm or excitement into some of our own patients?
I think that sense of empowerment, if you can, I can remember one time Teresa Ruggiero saying to me, "You did it. Look at what you've done." And I would walk out of her office. When I would go to an ophthalmology exam, it was crushing. It was, my vision wasn't terrible or anything like that. I didn't have a tumor in my eyes or anything like that, but I still, they made me feel awful. And I would leave her office and I would feel 10 feet tall. And so I think that you take somebody who's been troubled by their vision problems all their lives and you give them hope and advice and you tell them, we can work together to make this better. I will be your guide. I will really help you. I think it can make a huge difference. The other thing is, and this is harder to do, but I was lucky with Teresa Ruggiero because she's a little bit younger than me, but about my age, and was raising children at the time that I went to see her, and so were the vision therapists. We could joke in the vision therapy room about different things and about things going on in our lives. And that's really nice when the people who are helping to guide you in their vision are people you can really relate to. I think about that with TBI patients. If their vision therapist or their optometrist has had a TBI and really knows from where they're coming, it can make a huge difference. And obviously, we can't be all things to all people, but matching your patients with the vision therapists who could relate to them best, I think can be helpful. It can make people feel, it can give them the emotional support that they need to really run with it.
I think to generalize maybe even a little bigger from there, a therapy room needs to be a safe place.
That's right.
It needs to be a place where a person can fall flat on their face, not literally, but complete. And the fact that they tried, we applaud. Not in a, everybody gets a star kind of thing, but in a real way that you tried this thing. The only way you learn or make changes is to really commit resources to doing things. So I think, because a lot of offices, maybe they have 2, 3, 4 therapists and they can't match everybody.
Right.
You had a good fortune. But as long as the therapy room is a safe place, and I always felt when I was monitoring what was happening in my therapy room, there should be periods of unforced laughter that are part of, there can be an intense trying something, just try, involve, work, play, and then there's this release. And it should never be laughing at, laughing with, and the patient initiating, that, and it should just be this nice, unforced laughter kind of thing. And I think you think back of, was it Norman Cousins who, to get out of his cancer, did all the laughing at the, wheel in the funny movies, and that laughter and this kind of thing, I think is really a positive thing to help people consolidate learning and work through things in that kind of way.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and especially when people come in, they're going to have they're carrying a lot of baggage with them, and maybe feelings of humiliation and embarrassment about their condition, and yeah, you have to be sensitive to it and somehow make them feel comfortable and safe, like you said.
Yeah. I see there was one quick question to me, and I'll just take care of it. It's like, would you recommend VT to absolutely everyone? And it's like, so most likely everyone could benefit from, but not everybody needs. And I think getting involved in VT has to be based on the unmet needs. And you so beautifully talked about how Teresa did these tests, but mostly sat there, what do you want? What do you want to change? What would you like to? And as soon as she heard it, she did a few more things and sat you down and said, yep, together, I can help you get there. And you had never heard words like that or make that kind of thing happen.
Right, right.
Sue, I want to thank you for just an absolutely fantastic 90 minutes. We're at 89 minutes. I always enjoy the back and forth in the exchange with you. I hope others have. I want to thank Vivid Vision and iHeart VT for putting on these absolutely fantastic presentations, ways to get a reach out to people all over the world. And I just thank you for the time together. It brings back memories of lots of time. Somebody suggested, by the way, we should do another one of these, but specifically on the writings and the work of Fred Brock. And
oh, yeah.
I would love to do that one with you as well. So,
yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. I think we're at the end. I'll turn it back over to our main moderator, Colleen Cushion. And again, thank you to Vivid Vision. Thank you to iHeart VT. And everybody stay healthy.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Sue. This was absolutely wonderful. We got some agreement there that a session about Brock's writings would definitely fit and be exciting to watch. So we'll leave that for you to plan when you're not so busy, whenever that may be.
That's right. That's right.
But know that we've enjoyed it and we welcome you back anytime. And we love it that you participate in some of our sessions, Sue. I've seen you pop in here and there. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do for us and with us. We enjoy it. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. And you can always watch the recording on the iHeart VT site as well. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.